Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to tonight's Royal Television Society Technology Centre virtual event. You are highly encouraged to make use of the Q&A box here on Zoom, and we'll hopefully have time to get to a few of your questions at the end of the conversation. To introduce myself, I'm Kim Rowell, Managing Editor of News Production for ITN, a trustee and board member for UN Women UK, and chair of the Royal Television Society Technology Centre Committee. It gives me great pleasure to have organised this event for you this evening and to be able to introduce you to our brilliant panel, Nicky Cox MBE, Gavin Ramjaun, Ayshah Tull, and Lizzy Lambley. They've kindly all joined me tonight to delve more into the often complex area of children's news, specifically how to approach telling difficult stories to children. In today's fast-moving world, children are exposed to challenging news stories more than ever before. So how do we, as parents, educators, caregivers, producers and creators of these types of content, guide them through tough topics such as war, disasters, loss, without causing fear or confusion? I'll be coming to each of our panelists in turn, and it gives me great pleasure, and I'm delighted to be able to welcome Nicky Cox MBE, who is editor of First News and Sky's FYI news show for children. Nicky, thank you so much for speaking with me this evening.
You're so welcome. Thanks for asking me.
Thank you. And can you start by telling us more about your own career journey and how you came to be in your current role?
Do you know what? It's kind of going back to before work, really. I was maybe 14 years old and struggling to understand the news myself. And I was curious and interested, wanted to know what was going on. I remember I kept hearing about the Cold War and wondering why on earth they didn't go and fight somewhere warmer. There was no context. Nobody was talking to young people about it. So I vowed there and then, and I can picture myself sitting at my school in Wimbledon, that I was going to become a journalist and I was going to launch a newspaper for children like me. So it's kind of interesting that I don't know why that was in me and why that stuck with me all of these years, but it always did. I started life on the Croydon Advertiser as a trainee reporter. And while I was doing that, I started 2 or 3 years in, I started sub-editing on the Sunday Times. And then I went to the BBC for 13 years. But it was always in me, when I was at the BBC, I was very involved with children's BBC. So I kind of got very involved in children's because I knew I still wanted to do children's news. And I was thinking there was a pathway through, maybe it was Newsround, wasn't quite sure. But anyway, so I ended up getting the children's experience to back up the journalism background I had. And then eventually I left and set up First News, which shockingly to me is 20 years ago next year. And when we launched, it was honestly to so much ridicule at the time. A lot of the kind of the grown-up papers were kind of saying it was a crazy idea and children weren't interested in the news, and if they were, they'd look online and I pretended we'd done all this research, which we hadn't. My research was me, but we're here 20 years later. 2.6 million children read the paper every week, and it's remarkable how much the need for it has changed, really, from 20 years ago when it was a kind of a nice to have. Now I feel very much it's a need to have. And on the back of that, I launched Fresh Start Media, a children's television production company, because I felt that we needed to amplify the kind of the written news with video news for children, because by that point, they were getting their news from social media and from very unreliable sources, and that we needed to be providing video news for them as well. And luckily partnered with Sky Kids and Sky News, who have supported us for the last 7 years in making what is now daily news content for children and documentaries. So it's been great. It's good that we're doing it.
An incredible scope there. And when you're going about establishing a newspaper for children and considering, like you were saying, you as a child, the Cold War, why isn't it warmer? The innocence and the sweetness of that childish perspective. How do you then approach launching a newspaper? How do the ideas and the concept, how do you evolve and develop those?
I think unlike kind of the adult media, which, to be fair, the adult newspapers are very much selling on fear, unfortunately. It's a lot of negativity and scaremongering and sensationalist news. We think that there's a much bigger responsibility than that in delivering news. And to be honest, I think for adult news too, I think the psyche of the entire nation would change if there was a little bit more balance in how adult papers report the news. But certainly in First News, we think about what children are hearing, what are they talking about in the playground, what have they heard, what might they be worrying about, and we cover everything. It doesn't matter whether it's something horrible, a plane crash, a war, a terrorist attack. We know they're hearing about it, and we feel it's our responsibility to make sure that they're hearing about it within the proper context and with the proper kind of understanding and with reassurance and without unnecessary detail, without unnecessary imagery. But we don't shy away from telling them what's happening, because they need to know, and they need to know, say the context of everything. But we're also very careful to make sure that within the balance of both FYI, the TV show, and within First News, we represent good news and bad news. We don't fill either with negativity and negative stories. We make sure that we cover the good things that are happening in the world, and there's a lot more of that. You wouldn't believe it, but there really are. And it's really important that we don't want adults, let alone children, waking up every day feeling hopeless and helpless, and that there's, it's a horrible world and everything is bad. We need them to know that there's a lot of good, that they have their part to play, and that they grow up to be active and engaged citizens that want to make the world a better place, and that is possible, that they're empowered to do so. So that's how we decide. But it's very much, we do look at the flat plan, and the script for the show as well, and say, is it balanced? That's quite a heavy story, so let's make sure we balance that with something lighter, and make sure that we give a very balanced view of the world.
I find that so interesting when it comes to that story selection process and how you actually decide what's going on the different platforms. Is it different when you think about broadcast as opposed to publishing? Is there a different process that you adopt, or is it very similar?
It's similar and it's different, actually, and we work very closely in partnership, which is great. So all of the films that we make for Sky also go on the First News website and the First News app, and equally, on the show we say, for more detail on this, go to First News, because the paper can go into much more detail, much more background. We publish educational resources as well for teachers, so that they can then use perhaps the film that we made for Sky with a feature that we wrote for First News, and then show that all in assembly, and then there's classroom resources to take back to the classroom. So we kind of make sure that we offer everything. But yeah, the paper being written can go into much more detail than we can on the TV show. So the two actually work really in a very complementary way.
And that must feed into then the level of detail that you go into that's appropriate for a younger audience. Like you say, I suppose with the broadcast, if you have those additional resources that you can provide, you don't necessarily need to be as explicit within the actual visual of what you're showing. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's, I still feel for, our, researchers who are having to trawl through images and video from, the latest explosion in Gaza, to make sure that, what we are showing tells the story, but not in a unnecessarily upsetting way, because it is upsetting, and I worry about what our team sees sometimes, and what I've seen myself. Once you see something, you can't unsee it, and we're very mindful of that. So we make sure that any detail, whether that's written, spoken, or shown, is appropriate to tell the story correctly and accurately, but without unnecessarily upsetting people who can do nothing about it. You know, if we would go harder on something where there's a lesson to be learned. You know, if it's for example, we have a campaign called Look Up, which is about mobile phone use, and it's a shocking statistics about how many children are being hit by cars on their journey home from school because they are distracted by their phones. So we have they say this campaign, Look Up. And so we have been quite hard hitting with that, because there is a lesson to be learned for children. They need to know that if they do not look up from their phone and put their phone away while they're crossing the road, they could end up dead. And so therefore we, you know, we decide, what's the lesson to be learned here? What level of detail do we need to go to? Do we need to shock them a bit if it's something that they can do something about? If they can't, then, you know, we make sure that we're more sensitive, I suppose, in our choice of content.
And have you seen, I mean, you said First News launched 20 years ago, and you've been in this industry for a very long time. So how have you seen it evolve, and are there developments for both good and bad, and that have helped and hindered along the way for you? I suppose primarily in the digital space in the first instance.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, the kind of emergence of the digital platforms has made it easier for us to reach more children than ever before. However, its discoverability of the decent content among all of the misinformation and the disinformation, you know, that's fed to them through algorithms and everything else, that is the concern. So yes, we can reach them in big numbers, and we do. I mean, our FYI content goes out on all of the Sky News social platforms, on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and we're reaching, you know, a million children a week with that content. But I'm equally conscious that those same million children are seeing an awful lot of misinformation, and that's very worrying. So it's good and bad. You know, it's good in that for us all. You know, I think the internet and social media definitely, and AI, all of those things are positive for us all, but also come with huge negatives as well. And I think as adults, you know, we have to try and help children navigate that. And, you know, we're big advocates, both at First News and at FYI, of helping children to understand how to navigate that. You know, how to check their sources, all that kind of journalism rules, really. You know, does it look right? If it doesn't look right, ask someone or check somewhere else. Don't just believe what you read and what you see.
And on that misinformation, disinformation point, how do you help children distinguish fact from fiction and help them evolve into critical news consumers that we hope they would be?
Yeah, I mean, we through First News, we run initiatives like News Smart, and we're working on a new media literacy tool right now, actually, for schools. But on a day-to-day basis, it's really just making them question it, you know, and to make them realize that they should be questioning it. And actually, I think children are actually much more literate than maybe us adults think they are. And I know myself that I see things, I'm like, oh my gosh, have you seen it? Then you think, oh no, hang on, it's not true. You know, we all do that, but I think children are actually just as aware of that. We run a segment on FYI called Fake or Fact, and every week we have a true story and a negative story, and we set that up at the beginning of the show, you know, which is true, which isn't, and at the end we do the reveal. And that's not so much, I mean, it's quite fun, kids love it, it's one of the most popular bits of the show, but actually the reason that we do it is not really about those stories, it's about making them question it, so that every time they see something, they question it and they think, oh, you know, it might not be true. And I think that's a really important thing for all of us to do, but particularly in the world of AI now, where it's getting more and more difficult to distinguish between what's true and what isn't.
I could really talk to you all day, Nicky, and I have so many questions. But one last one before we sadly have to move on. But I understand that your career history involves taking a group of children to interview Margaret Thatcher. It would be great to hear more about that in particular, but if there are any other memorable moments that you've had from your career.
Yeah, do you know, it's funny really, because at the time I was 21, working on the Croydon Advertiser, and thought it'd be a great idea to have children's news in the paper. And as I said to you, it was with me from the beginning, this need to do news for children. And I remember saying to the editor, yeah, why haven't we got any news for children in the Croydon Advertiser? And they were like, oh, well, it's an adult newspaper. And I said, yeah, but children live in Croydon. They need their news. So I said, well, if you want to do a news for children, you can have a page for children. And it was they set up this page called Nicky and the Newshounds, and it involved getting lots of children within Croydon then becoming little news reporters for us and sending in stories from their schools and their clubs and everything else. And I kind of managed this whole thing. And I wrote to the Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, and said, we have this club of child reporters. Can we come and interview you? And I was absolutely gobsmacked to get a letter back saying, absolutely, come along. And so we did. And I took four young Croydon kids along. It was very funny, because I always remember that she was answering their questions, and she was holding this glass of water. And as she kind of moved it up to drink it, she knocked it on the armchair and then tipped this glass of water in her lap. And the kids were just like watching this water just seep through her skirt and onto the floor. But she carried on. She didn't miss a beat. And she just carried on talking. She put the glass back down and carried on like nothing had happened. And but anyway, that was the first of many Prime Minister interviews. I mean, I think since First News was launched, I think we're on our 8th Prime Minister, and I've taken kids to Downing Street to interview them all. And it's fascinating, the difference in how they react to children as opposed to adults. I think when it's an adult reporter, they're on their guard, they're careful about what they say. But with kids, they're not, they underestimate them, I have to say. And I always remember as a 7-year-old when we were interviewing George Osborne, who was the Chancellor at the time, and he said to him, do you have to be good at maths to do your job? George Osborne kind of said, well, yes, but it's about economics. And this kid said, what's 7 times 7? And he said, you know what, I've always made it, a rule not to answer maths questions. And this little boy, Sam, said, you don't know, do you? He said, it's 49. And the next day, the Sunday Times had like a double-page spread on the fact that the Chancellor of the Exchequer did not know his times tables. And then I saw Nick Clegg a few days later, and he said the following day, all of the cabinet had a copy of the times tables in their boxes for the day, just in case journalists asked them if a times tables question. So lots of memorable moments, but the best ones of all are the feedback from kids, to be honest. When they write to us and say, thank you so much, I understand now what's happening, and that they've gone on. And we've been going for 20 years, and some of those original readers are now working as journalists themselves, and they say that's down to having kind of ignited their interest from a very young age, reading First News. So that's the best thing of all.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Nicky. And yeah, MP should definitely know their times tables. Well done, that little boy. Some brilliant and thought-provoking insights there. And now, to build on them, I am delighted to be joined by BBC Sport freelance presenter and journalist and former Newsround presenter, Gavin Ramjaun. Thank you, Gavin. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Kim. How are you? That's a brilliant story, Nicky. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
Shocking, wasn't it? Now, you have such a wealth of experience. You've worked for the BBC, ITV, Sky, and so many of the mainstream broadcasting news channels. But I wanted to know whether your time at Newsround and Sportsround helped inform how you approach and how it informs your style potentially when you're having to speak to different audience ages and demographics.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, when I started at Newsround and Sportsround, and Lizzy's on the panel as well, she was there when I was starting as well. So it's, I'm grateful to be involved with people from the very start as well here right now. And it's sort of like an almost full circle moment. But yeah, absolutely. Back in the day, my first TV on air job was presenting on Newsround and then Sportsround when that was brought in. And it has formed my approach and style to my presentation. It's formed my identity as a presenter. It's formed my way of thinking as a journalist. I think the way that I approach stories now is I try and I'm not saying I make every single story approachable in the sense that every child or young person has to understand it, but it's just that when you start out from the very, very beginning with a young audience, you have to make everything translatable, and translatable in the sense that your words need to make sense to them, and the story conveyance needs to sink through for them, and also your personality needs to come through as well, because effectively at that age it's a very fertile background for people to buy into you as a presenter or as a journalist. So if you have a strong personality or a strong style, you're likely to cut through better. And I think we were very ahead of our time, I have to say, when I was at Newsround and Children's BBC. The way we were doing things, the way we were implementing digital, the way we were, implementing the website within our storytelling, interactivity, as well as the traditional TV work, and we had radio too. We were very much cutting edge really with it all, and the way that we did things, I think one at a time, it's very much stood me in great ground for my career, where I've been in the game for a long time now, 20 years. So you can see the grey hairs. So it's so it does feel like that grounding, that essence of it. And they say that people who've come through children's are the best trained. I'm not just saying that because we're on this panel, but people do say that you look at the presenters who come through the children's route, and they have got an incredible grounding in the way that they tell stories and present and write and produce. All of it is down to the way you're brought up and the way you're trained. I don't think there's ever a better training ground than children's TV. I really don't.
And it's quite a responsibility, isn't it? It's fair to say, because there's stories and there are moments. I mean, even just trying to explain Israel Gaza to a child, I'm not sure I always fully understand what's going on. So, how did you approach that when it comes to telling difficult news stories to children?
Yeah, it's one of those ones where I think that's a great example. How do you explain that in a minute and a half? Because there's so much going on with it. The stuff in Northern Ireland at the moment. There's so much conflict going on in the world. How on earth do you distill that into a short piece of video or a shorter article, whatever it might be, so children can understand it, and so you can understand it as well. It's there's two battles going on there. You need to understand it in order to communicate it. But yeah, I mean, I've covered a lot of really big stories early in my career at Children's, at Newsround, and at in a point in my life where I was learning the job too, as well as trying to get across really, really serious and sensitive subjects. And a couple of examples I can give you now where they really stick in my mind from back in the day. This is going back over 10, 15 years now, 15, yeah, 20 years nearly. I don't know if you remember, there was a story of the Suffolk murders, a guy called Steve Wright, who was murdering women in Ipswich. That was something that at the time was something I would have had no idea how to communicate that. But it's about getting the facts out, being really impartial, being really to the point, and not necessarily, you do have to maybe not communicate some elements of it, of those types of stories, but there are ways to do it where you can be very factual, very straight, and not dwell on things and editorialize, so it becomes more of a story than it needs to be. But at the same time, the gravity of the story is it's leading all the news agendas everywhere else. So you have to reflect it. And another one was, sadly, it's really sad to actually think about this. There's a former colleague of ours who was a presenter on the art show called Mark Spate, who committed suicide. And that one was extremely hard to get across because he was part of the audience. He was part of the presenter team of our audience as well, effectively. So those are two examples I can give now where it's just, you have to, be really, really honest, straight, and to the point, and sensitive to the fact of what has happened. You have to reflect the gravity of the stories. But the complexity within what is in today's world, elections, for example, elections aren't easy subjects to master. There's more to it than just who won a vote. There's many subtexts towards any election at the moment. I suppose you look at the current political landscape, by-elections, all that kind of thing. Who are reform? Why is Nigel Farage popular? That kind of thing. It's those sorts of angles on news stories now are becoming more and more common and more prevalent and more, I guess, difficult to tell. So if you can do that in a succinct way, I do think anyone else, not necessarily children or younger audiences, they can learn from that, because you're communicating the essence of what that story is. You don't necessarily have to tailor it to someone who's, you know, a teenager or whatever. It's about getting the facts out in a simple, succinct and punchy manner where the storytelling can resonate, really.
And picking up on that emotional connection to a story, like you're saying, Mark Spate, who died by suicide. I mean, you've recently become a dad yourself. Huge congratulations.
Thank
I
you.
hope it's going well. I think you're about 12 weeks in, but
Yeah.
has that changed your own outlook on how you approach your role as a news reporter from that empathetic point of view?
Yeah, that you know, so that's a great question. That is a really, really good question. And you know, I'm at a point in my life where I didn't know if I was going to become a dad. You know, I'm in my early 40s now. So it's I thought have I'm not saying, you know, have I missed the boat or what have you, but it's you don't really think about it in a sense where until it happens in how you cover stuff in your job. And I've been lucky to be on paternity leave at the moment, so I'm not necessarily in the thick of it, but I do look at stories now. I mean, for example, the Constance Martin, Mark Gordon one at the moment now, and it makes you feel things that you wouldn't have felt before, perhaps. You would be aware of that story, you'd know it was pretty bad, but with it, when there's a baby involved or children involved, you are so much more invested. So I think when it comes to, you know, emotional connections like that, you are more in it now. You're more in it because you will be seeing and being exposed to things that perhaps previously you weren't necessarily as enamored to or connected to. Whereas now, like for example, if I see something that is heartwarming or is, you know, heartbreaking, then you are more likely to you know feel something when you are reporting, and it's going to be hard because I think, you know, when that connection is more personal and, you know, when you see things and you are affected emotionally, it can make you can make the job harder effectively. So I suppose it would make you a bit more maybe the term I suppose would be empathetic perhaps towards certain things, but it would also maybe make it harder to communicate in an impartial manner perhaps. I suppose it's a difficult one. Until I'm in it, I won't necessarily know. But I do think it's made me think about, particularly when it comes to news issues and news stories around children, around young people, around dads, around parenting. Those subjects now will have extra special meaning for me because I'm in it as well. You know, I'm the one that will be having to think about the finances around parenting, you know, the time off from work, how to do the school run and still maintain a busy lifestyle and do everything. And it's, you know, it's hard, you know, as you know, it's just hard, you know, and yet everything things that have got a bit more ante on them now, basically off the back of this. So yeah, yeah,
Oh, the ante.
yeah, definitely, yeah.
And you have founded Dadzilla and Manzilla, which are both on online platforms to support men's mental health. I mean, it speaks to everything that you were just saying, but the mental health element for men in particular, could you speak more to that and the responsibility that you obviously feel towards being representative in that area?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Yeah, it's Dadzilla's a new one. Being new dad, I wanted to, you know, incorporate the dad side of what being a journalist and journalism is to me. You know, there's certain stories within my lifestyle that will I feel resonate with an audience for dads, and it's very much a new platform where I'm sort of discovering dad issues, dad news, parenting problems, parenting hacks, etc. as I sort of go along. And Manzilla is something I came up with just around lockdown time, and it was they're sort of they're strong issues core to me, and I believe a demographic which I feel is very affected by men's mental health and issues around men's status and identity. And for me, like, you know, as someone who's upper millennial, just about, I feel like we are in a catchment where there are certain issues that are changing within the world and are changing within certain lifestyles that we were previously used to that are just not there now. And it's about trying to make men more aware and comfortable within that demographic of change and within that lifestyle of change. And it's an absolute, you know, thing that men don't talk about a lot of issues. And I wanted to form this podcast and wanted to get a news site going that discusses topics that I feel men maybe shy away from, but could do with maybe having a light, you know, the light shone on certain things they may be going through. And it's a difficult one because you can ask them out personally, like you can ask men how they are, how they're feeling, etc. And you may not necessarily get something that, you know, that is a proper answer straight away. Whereas I feel like, you know, women are so much better at communicating and talking about emotions and feelings. And for men, it's still a bit of a taboo, particularly if you go outside into into the counties, the counties of the UK and Scotland and the regions and Wales, Northern Ireland, etc. I feel like you can, away from London, it's more difficult for men to open up, and there is definitely a stereotype of a certain man of this generation. So for me, it's trying to open that up and trying to be honest with, like, stories that are affecting men of a certain age, 30 and above, 35-ish and above, really. That, there are taboos around talking about certain things. And for me, it's like I wanted to try and get a platform or a message over where it discusses things that are, not talked about in mainstream media and in I mean, it is more mainstream now, I have to say. It's become more mainstream in the last 3 to 4 years, easily, maybe 5 years. But I still feel like it has to keep going. Like Men's Mental Health Day, Mental Health Awareness Month, etc. These are all great initiatives, but it has to be regularly, every day, really, for it to become, a solution for guys out there who are struggling.
Bearing all of that in mind, I mean, your career has moved in so many different directions since you first started out in journalism. So what advice could you, and is it possible to offer in having these open and honest and frank conversations, but also just generally to anyone looking to start out in this kind of career? What advice would you give?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question in today's times. It's a very fast-moving industry, as we know. Digital is such a big sort of leader really within it now. But I think it's all about passions. Following your passions, following your interests, and working really hard at building your contact base for the niche and for the area that you want to develop in. Personally, I think that is the best way to go about it. The platform is interesting because there are so many different ways you can go about approaching how to get in now. In terms of, my passions and where I've sort of developed, I feel like it's come to me over time. The passion as a sports presenter has always been something that I've had within me, and I've managed to get in and do that and have the privilege of doing that, and worked on some incredible events, met some amazing people, interviewed some phenomenal people, and I'll always be very humble and grateful for that. But I feel like if you are a hungry starter now, you want to get into journalism, you want to be, in the content game. I hate to use that word content, but it is content now. There are no real rules as much, in that sense now. You can forge your own path. There used to be a traditional route where you would go maybe regional and then work your way up. Whereas, or start as a runner at a production company and work your way up that way. Whereas now I feel like the sort of the barriers to entry are lower, so it's very much more positive. But having knowing who you are, knowing what you want to do, knowing where you want to be, and then planning that route to get somewhere within that. It might not be it goes straight away. I mean, I was very fortunate in the sense I became a children's TV presenter quite soon after university, which was, very, very, sort of, I think, rare in a sense. But, if I hadn't have done that route, I'd have tried to go down another route. But these routes now, there are more of them, I feel. So I'd say stay optimistic, stay hungry, and keep the faith, keep believing.
I love that. It's brilliant advice. Thank you so much, Gavin. I really appreciate you having joined us here this evening. There's some brilliant takeaways for all of us there. If you have any questions for our panel, they'll all be coming back up at the end. So Nicky, Gavin, Ayshah, or Lizzy, please do just pop them in. There's a little Q&A box there on Zoom. Send them in. We're more than happy to answer pretty much anything. But now I have the pleasure of introducing Ayshah Tull. She is Channel 4 News' correspondent and a presenter, and another former Newsround alumni. Hi, Ayshah. Thank you for joining us.
Hiya, thank you so much for having me. I've absolutely loved listening to Gavin and Nicky. I got so involved that I'm thinking, do I have anything interesting to say? They've already said it all.
Of course you do. And you've presented for children and adults. What would you say are the biggest differences in how you approach telling difficult stories for these two audiences, really different audiences?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. It's a real challenge. I think it's more on curation, so what you choose to tell and when. For a Channel 4 News audience, they kind of know the basics of a story and they want stuff that's more in depth. So Gavin used the example of Constance Martin and Mark Gordon. We had like a longer kind of thing that we put on streaming, and people want to know the nitty-gritties of everything. They want to have all of that detail. If you are going for a Channel 4 News audience, if you're going for a Newsround audience, that story is absolutely not something that we would touch, not something that we would go for. And so you have to curate a little bit more closely what you want to kind of engage in. I remember in my time at Newsround, I mean, Gavin's time sounds wild. However, I had Brexit, some other, like a Scottish referendum, 2 Trump presidencies, or 2, you know, 1 presidency and then 1 he didn't get it. It's just been such a wild time. And in that time, we had to be really careful about what we were telling kids and what we were letting them know. And we had to pick out a lot of things. I also had a lot of battles, I think, because I came from adult news, went to children's, and then went back to adult. I remember pitching about Oscar Pistorius, for example, and that was a really difficult story to tell. And initially, I think our editors didn't want to tell that story. And I said, it's up to us to tell that story in a responsible way that kids can get what has happened to this person that, you know, many of them saw as an absolute hero, especially in off the back of 2012 in the Olympics. And I thought it was our job to do that. And we were the only people that were well placed to do that. So yeah, I think that's how I kind of approach things.
And embellishing on that, are there transferable skills transferring between children's news and adult news? Does it work like that? Did you learn any lessons that you found really helpful, maybe from more of the production process or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Gavin touched on this as well. I use everything. I think I say my newsroom gets really sick of me because I must say, well, a Newsround, this is what we did, because I use that sense of making stuff clear, making it make sense. That is something that is ingrained in me and is really important. We assume so much knowledge, even as adults, and even for Channel 4 News, that it drives me nuts. We expect people to just be in on the news like we are. They're not. They have busy lives. They've got stuff going on. So I think it's really important for us to walk people through things sometimes, and catch them up on things. And that's something I definitely learned from Newsround. And I think being at Newsround as well, I was able to hone like my on-screen career. So I was able to be myself, be a little bit more. It's where I use humor quite a lot in a lot of things, because it's easier. It puts people at ease. It makes them want to talk to you more. And I learned that through Newsround, having to talk to kids that would be like, oh yeah, we have to watch you at school. And I'd say, oh gosh, I'm so sorry that we had to put you through that. But it really helped me become the journalist that I am. I wouldn't be the journalist that I am without having that background and having that knowledge.
And you have such a great energy and personality to you. And I was talking to Gavin about the responsibility and pressure that there is associated to delivering distressing news to children. And how do you manage that responsibility?
It's such a deep responsibility that you feel. And I think I kind of underestimated it when I got into journalism. I didn't quite think, you know, when you're on camera, sometimes it's easier to think that people aren't even watching. I think because I feel that sense of responsibility, I want to get it right. It's really, really important. So I check, double check, triple check all the time just to make sure that I'm getting things right. In my time at Newsround, the hardest story, and it's still to this day the hardest story I've ever had to tell, is the Ariana Grande concert and the terror attack, which was for the first time in my recollection or ever was targeted directly at kids. This is not something that we could skirt around. It wasn't, you know, we had to tell our audience that this really evil, horrible thing happened and it was directed at you. And I felt so much responsibility in making sure that I was doing the right thing, telling them everything that they needed to know, but also telling them, and Nicky pointed to this earlier, it's kind of almost counterintuitive, saying, hey, you can find out this information, but if you need a break, if you need to not watch Newsround for a while, hey, that's absolutely fine. Maybe take a break. Don't bombard yourself with everything. Just take as much as you need to take, because this is heavy stuff. And I think that that's something that I still use to this day. If I'm not on shift, I will absolutely, like on Saturdays or stuff, if I'm not working a weekend, I will not look at anything, because you do need to have that compartmentalized bit in your brain for you to be able to function, because there's just so much going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And those professional boundaries, as you said, are so important. And is that how you manage your own emotions? Because something like the Ariana Grande story is incredibly upsetting, but you're obviously trying to relay it to your audience, probably also feeling quite personally emotional and upset. So how do you approach managing that?
I think it's really important to think that, you know, it's not about you. I take myself out of it. It's not about me in that moment. And my job is to deliver something on air that is as polished as can be, so that people understand it and they can take something away. I also remember I was one of the first journalists on the scene at the Grenfell Tower fire. And that was also just, it was a horrific scene. There were firefighters everywhere. I also remember there were children everywhere, and I remember them looking up at 24-hour news, and they had 24-hour news on, and 24-hour news obviously wasn't catering it to kids. So you just had these kids looking up and hearing all this really distressing stuff. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, I just want you to go home, watch Newsround, get that little bit of curated thing just for you, and then switch off and don't worry about it. I remember thinking about that. And I just, yeah, I always think at this time, it's not about me, it's about my identity with my audience and making sure that they get the information they need. But do I go home and cry sometimes? Absolutely. I'm a big crier. I mean, I cry at Finding Nemo. I'm pathetic. But I really do. And it just reminds me of the Constance Martin and Mark Gordon story. Actually, that was something that really took it out of me. Even yesterday, I was presenting in our base in Leeds, and I was reading the cue, which is like the bit before you go into the report. And as soon as we went into the report, I remember like there was a bit of a tear in my eye, and I had to stop myself, because I was like, it's important for our audience to know this information. They don't need to see you cry, even though you really feel for this little baby. So yeah, that's how I managed to keep my emotions in check. I'm not great at it because I'll cry off air, but then I'm great when I'm on air. I'll make sure that I don't fall apart. No one wants to see that. No one wants to see that. Not really.
There's an authenticity in it as well, though, isn't there? And I mean, I cry at Neighbours, you say Finding Nemo. To talk about the changes that you touched on it there in the news landscape itself, and the 24-hour news cycle you were saying when you were at Grenfell and the kids are just kind of checking in and seeing what's going on. But how would you say the rise of social media in this way, as well as streaming and all of that, how has that changed the way that children and young people encounter difficult news stories? And maybe comparing that to when you were at Newsround, I think, I mean, you spoke about being able to manage it to a point at Newsround, but now it's so accessible.
It's so changed. It's so different. I think when I was at Newsround between 2013 and 2018, we were already talking about digital first strategy. So it's really funny. You just hear it all the time in newsrooms now. It's like, oh, we're thinking digital first. I was like, well, Newsround were thinking that way back when, because they could see kids were on these platforms, and you have to make sure that you're going to the platforms that they're on and not necessarily waiting for them to come at 4:20, because, you know, quite frankly, they've got other things to do. So you have to make sure that you're making content for those particular platforms. I think that it's really even more challenging now, because they are getting information in all these different ways. All these AI stories that keep popping up. I literally have my husband say, like, you know, like, have you seen this? And then, you know, he has to say it's not real or it's real. It's just so confusing. I think that means that content makers like ourselves have even more responsibility to make sure that we're on the platforms that they're on, make sure that we're reaching them in the ways that they're finding this news. And also being that trusted voice. Being a trusted voice is so important, that they know that they can come to you and you're going to have the right information. You've already verified it. And I think there needs to definitely be more media literacy in school. You'll just have, you'll have like various little lessons here and there, but actually kids really need to know in this so-called post-truth era, like what is actually real. And that's so important. And I think that's something that we should definitely be doing more of.
And the accuracy of that representation, young people need to see, and they want to see, their own cultures and communities represented within the news. So how important do you think it is that is, and again, the responsibility on us as content creators to make sure that that is present?
It is so important. Luckily, children's television is actually a lot better than other spaces. Children's television has always kind of led the way. One of my great mentors in this world is Floella Benjamin, who I absolutely love to pieces. And every time I see her, she gives me a great big hug, and she's just the most wonderful, encouraging person. So, children's TV, you guys, we've been at the forefront of this for a very long time, but we should never underestimate it. I think that it's really important for kids to look up and see someone that represents them. Not only that, they deserve it. And you can see in some of the coverage that we've done over certain things that when groups feel like they have not been represented, they go elsewhere. And they might be getting news from sources that aren't necessarily impartial, that are biased, that are more kind of news entertainment type things. So you need to make sure that you are reaching out to all of these diverse audiences and people can see themselves on screen. Otherwise, they're going to go elsewhere and they're going to get information in echo chambers that is just not going to be helpful for anyone. So I think it's absolutely crucial, and I always bang home about it. And it's funny because sometimes I don't realize how important my role can be until you meet people. I met someone the other day who remembered that I interviewed them for a report over 10 years ago in a ballet school about representation in ballet, funny enough. And she was like, "You were my Newsround presenter. I remember you." And I was like, I cried again, but I was just like, "Oh, this is so amazing. And I can't believe you remember me, and you kind of have followed my journey since I've been at Newsround to Channel 4. And you still have that affinity, and you looked and you saw me doing something and you thought, oh, well, I can actually do that in the future." So that was really nice. And that was lovely.
And what words of advice would you give to anyone that's interested in entering journalism, doing your job, maybe not exactly your job, and also just to tell stories that matter to their generation? What words of encouragement would you offer?
Oh, I'm always saying, I'm also a trustee at John Schofield. I'm always saying, come on in and, push me off my chair. And that's what the legendary Jon Snow would say to me. He'd be like, he was so welcoming and so supportive. I would say, in this day and age, you can start your own platform. You can start your own brand and just go out there and find the stories that you care about and tell them. I think that you should also be just super, super pushy. Don't take no for an answer. I had so many no's, so many no's that I can't even remember. I remember even getting into journalism. I must have sent like 100 kind of letters because I'm old. So I actually sent those letters at the time and just got all of these no's and then kind of 3 yeses. But those 3 yeses were able to, get the work experience that I needed and to pass through. So you'll get loads of no's, but you have to push past that and be really passionate. The other thing I would say is reach out to those who you admire. I have done that all throughout my career, and I've been really lucky. I know people are really busy, but even the likes of Floella, who still helps, and Charlene White, every time I see her in our ITM building, I still say, "Oh my gosh, it's Charlene." She hates it. But I literally reach out to those that you admire and say, "Hey, do you have 5 minutes? Do you have a call?" Most people, we love to talk about ourselves. We're in the media. We absolutely love it. And if we feel like we're helping someone, that's even better. So don't be afraid to get in touch with people who you think are amazing and people whose careers that you want to follow in the future.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Ayshah. If you could stay around with us for a while longer, as we'll
Absolutely.
to any audience questions. I've got a few coming already, so that's brilliant. But if you want to add in a question, please do. There's the Q&A little box there on Zoom. Please make use of it. But now, finally, last, but of course no means least, we are delighted to welcome Lizzy Lambley, who is Head of International Production at Discovery Education. Thank you for joining us, Lizzy. Can you firstly tell us more about your own career journey and how you came to be where you are today?
I often describe my job at Discovery Education as an amalgamation of all of the roles I've had along the way. I started off in the regions and then had a very happy home for many years at Newsround. Hi, everyone. Plus every offshoot of the show, of which there were many at the time. Via quite a few other jobs, my passion for impact storytelling led me to Save the Children, which opened the door to international work. And when I randomly moved to Egypt, I began making films for UNHCR, documenting the journeys of refugees. And that work eventually led to IEFTA, which is a wonderful organisation that supports film talent from emerging regions. And it was a powerful introduction to content creation for global audiences, which leads me back to my current role at Discovery Education, who at the time needed someone with experience of production in Egypt, as well as bringing together everything I care about: meaningful, globally viable, factual content and news for children.
And thank you for that. And for anyone who's not aware, and I'm sure there are plenty of people that are aware, but can you tell us more about, or just give us an overview of the services that Discovery Education provides? Because there's an awful lot of resources there, isn't there?
Yes, Espresso is well, it's Espresso by Discovery Education now, because obviously it started probably around 20 years ago. And it has a long history of providing curriculum-aligned news direct to primary school audiences. And along with that, there's a lot of curriculum-aligned topical resources for teachers to dip into for whatever they're teaching. When we're back online for the new academic year in September, we'll continue to produce curriculum-aligned news, and along with it, the various resources like Picture of the Week. We also have extracted news reports, which sit against most curriculum subject areas. So if teachers need real-world examples for lessons, they can quickly dip in and find something. And every resource in the product and story is carefully considered for how it impacts and interests children, particularly on the news side. We deal with difficult news, and we do have to be very careful to make and consider the makeup of our classrooms and consider how different children with different perspectives might react. On the news side of things, we aim to cut through the politics, remain unbiased, state the facts, use appropriate language, imagery. We provide supporting resources from fact files, glossaries, and also advice on what to do if the news upsets the children or if a teacher needs further support for the class.
I suppose something also that is really interesting that we haven't touched on as yet as part of this conversation is that curriculum alignment. It would be great if you could talk to us more about the responsibility there. And I mean, as Nicky alluded to earlier, the work you do with teachers and educational experts to make sure that what you're doing aligns with the key stages of academia in that way.
Yeah, everything we create is either aligned to the curriculum or providing education enrichment with the aim of sparking curiosity, essentially. We make content with specific learning outcomes in mind, but it has to be done in an accessible way that also sticks. And for that, we have a huge diverse array of experts, from subject matter experts, curriculum designers, curriculum teams, immersive teams, engineers, analytical research teams looking at the trends, data, and then of course the all-important user research. But I think using our English aligned, because DE is a big global company with lots of different kind of curriculum aligned products. So kind of just focusing on where our news service sits, which is in the curriculum aligned UK product, Espresso, on a day-to-day basis, and sort of more in relation to the news as well. We work together, both the curriculum side and the producers, to bring together the two areas of expertise. So for the news, for example, we look at the news through a lens of both the newsworthiness of stories for our audience, and then also the alignment to the curriculum. So nothing's really created without that sort of curriculum need in the back of our minds.
That's really interesting. And Ayshah spoke to the prevalence and the challenges around rolling news coverage and social media. Have you got any advice for how parents and teachers can help children avoid overexposure? Because the accessibility is the primary concern, I would think. Is there anything in that is particularly a worry or a concern or a challenge for Discovery?
I mean, it's just, we're in a world that's increasingly hard to navigate, you know, for children, parents, teachers, like news and information just seep into all corners. And it's, you know, we're in a world where conflict's dominating headlines, disinformation's rife. And I think the biggest thing teachers and parents can do to help overexposure is just through increased media literacy, like giving children the tools to understand and think about what they're seeing, supporting children in identifying trusted and reliable news sources that are age appropriate and factually correct. And I think, you know, teaching pupils about disinformation and misinformation, particularly in relation to online content, is something that schools are increasingly focusing on, and also something, you know, we do have to and need to address through our news service. And just talking to children and knowing what they're exposed to or watching is as good a place to start as any.
Yeah, and we're all different as well, aren't we? Even obviously clearly in the way that we parent as well. So how then would you go about navigating that difference in expectations of parents, and some clearly wanting to protect their children and shield them from distressing news, others using or going to, you know, Discovery Education, places like Newsround, thinking this is the safest place for me to go to for a clear explanation and a way of explaining the heavier subjects to my child?
Yeah, it's tricky. Our news service, though, is predominantly front of class resource, so the teacher makes an active choice to share the news. So in some ways we've got that extra barrier, but of course, you know, you don't make the news in the way that you do, thinking, oh, there's an extra barrier. But I do think like everything can be done in the knowledge that if it's explained in an age appropriate way and in context, and the context and educational intent is really important to bridge the differences in expectations. This matters because it's important for children to understand what's going on in the world. It develops critical thinking, builds awareness and citizenship, it encourages curiosity and learning, promotes conversation and debate, even when the news is hard to hear, when delivered in the right way, right context, right considerations, right imagery, right level of language. I mean, there's a lot of things to think about. That information, you know, I do believe can be a really powerful antidote to the anxieties of hearing the news outside a safe and trusted space.
And something else that we haven't really spoken about is accessibility. I know that Discovery Education has previously produced British Sign Language versions, and there are different specials that you've done around neurodiversity and things like that. So is that a real kind of marker for you to be that open and accessible to all of society, really?
Yeah, the special series have enabled us to look into topics that come up in news and like really impact our audience. And as you mentioned, those two, the deaf awareness and neurodiversity, where we heard from children who just wanted to talk about their lives and situations in school. And, you know, they're probably my favorite and most watched. And I just love it when kids can just say what they need to say. And I think other children listen, absorb, and are more empathetic when they're hearing it from the horse's mouth. And anything we can do at any level to make the news more accessible, from creating signed versions of a bulletin to sharing transcripts with customers, providing closed captions, is critical. And this can be done through both the content we create and the platform through which we deliver the content. And in terms of broader innovations, there's so much opportunity for accessibility and adaptiveness with adaptive and immersive learning technologies. For example, VR and AR to create really engaging and real feeling experiences where kids become active participants in that experience and education side of it, and then they're able to access learning in many more varied ways.
Thank you for that. I think we've had like such a broad spectrum of insights and ideas, and yeah, thank you all. Thank you to all of the panel for your offerings this evening. I've had a couple of questions come into me directly. Thank you for that. If you do want to put one in the Q&A, you're welcome to do that too, but you can also directly message me as well, but you're welcome to do both. So everyone is back on now, so you can address one to Lizzy, Ayshah, Gavin, or Nicky. So the first one that I've had come in is: a decreasing number of Gen Z watch news on linear channels, if indeed they watch the news at all. Those that do consume news often watch news on disruptors like TLDR News. Where will today's year 1/2 children be getting their news from when they reach teenage years? So maybe Nicky, if we bring you back in at that point, if you're if you're happy to answer that.
Yeah, sure. Well, yes, not on television, I don't think. I mean, that's already not really happening. You know, we made the decision with FYI really to take it off the channel, off Sky News channel, and to put it on all the Sky News digital platforms instead, and say on First News, where it's kind of on demand directly for schools. You know, YouTube and the like. So yeah, YouTube. I think YouTube is the future, unfortunately, for everybody, or maybe fortunately, I don't know. But it's definitely, even I have a daughter who is 23, and she was watching something on TV, and she was like, "Oh, I'm going to watch the next episode." And I said, "Well, you can't, because it's not until next Saturday." And she was like, "What?" She had absolutely no comprehension about linear television, that, you know, there was an actual time when something would be on, that you couldn't just binge watch everything now. And she's 23, so, you know, a 1-year-old, I mean, there's no way that kind of linear viewing habit is going to be by then.
It's interesting though, because then if you look at drama as a different genre, I know this is probably the worst example I could possibly offer, but Bridgerton, for example, they dropped the first 4 or 5 episodes and you had to wait then, I think, a month until the next lot of episodes. So do you think that the TV and news as well is trying to kind of re-incentivize that? No, you have to wait for this content because it's good and it's worth waiting for. Do you think that's part of it?
I think, gosh, I think traditionalists, broadcasters are trying, but even then, as you say, they've dropped 4. You know, they're not really expecting somebody to kind of wait, you know, a week for the next. And I think, you know, some, you know, you binge watch and then you have to wait for the next series. Things like White Lotus, things that are really popular. I think people are irritated having to wait at all, even for the next series, let alone. But certainly with news, I mean, you know, people are so used to finding out stuff instantly now.
Yeah.
You know, as soon as it happens, you can find everything else about it. There is no, you know, it's got to be news as it happens, and that doesn't happen with linear. That has to be, you know, it probably won't even be in the palms of our hands. It probably won't even be these by then. It's going to be kind of, we're probably going to see it through our eyelids. I mean, who knows?
Ayshah and Gavin, do you have any view on where you think people will be getting their news in the future?
They're certainly not going to get it on TV. I mean, we can already see where viewing figures are going. I think people are more likely to kind of go to podcasts. Podcasts are becoming more popular. That kind of where you find out a little bit of information and then you want to delve deeper. I think that kind of habit is starting a little bit. I did I remember doing the Free Britney movement. I was one of like the first in the UK to go into it and do it. And we went out to LA and we did like a podcast. And interestingly, the stuff that we did on TV for it, the little report, didn't do as well as the podcast did. Because actually what people wanted to hear was the in and outs of everything and when it all started. And they really wanted all of that granular analysis. And I think people will still, come to places, luckily, like BBC and like Channel 4 ITV for that deep analysis. On TV, I just don't see it. So it's really important to adapt very quickly if you've not already, I think.
And is that a consideration also for commissioners and producers? Because I know when I was at the BBC and we were making documentaries, we would go to the different outlets. So we'd go to 5 Live, The One Show, Radio 4, Women's Hour, as well as BBC Breakfast and what have you, from the point of commissioning and saying, we're making this documentary. Is there any bespoke content you want that we can tailor to your platform? Because then obviously you broaden the reach and you broaden the demographic appeal as well in doing that. Do you think that's the way of the future?
I think it is. I think you need to be aware of where your audiences are. And I think for the longest time, people kind of wanted, just wanted us to be able to drive things to telly. So we're making all these lovely things and putting it online, but can we drive them to this? And it's just like, no, you've just got to stop trying to do this and putting it in this shop window. You need to kind of be on YouTube. You need to be doing those things where you're doing stuff for people where they're actually looking. So a lot of the things that we do now is the longer kind of form streaming things for YouTube, and people are watching those and then associating our brand with that, and not necessarily Channel 4 News 7 o'clock. Most people don't even know it's still on at 7 o'clock. They ask me, they're like, what time are you on? I'm like, 7 o'clock. And it's been that way for ages, but people just don't watch in that way.
It's not the appointment to view so much anymore, is it?
No.
You know what? When there's the only thing I would say is when there's breaking news, I think you then go to your trusted BBC, ITN, Channel 4, CNN, whatever it is, because you then want to know that you can believe what you're seeing, that you can trust it. So I think that still exists right now.
And Gavin, do you see it a lot in sport? Because I know like last week we had Wimbledon, for example. I know that if I was out and about and not by a television, I was on the BBC Sport app trying to find out like who was the latest score for the men's or women's or whatever was going on. Do you see that more within a sport environment?
It's a really, really good point and a really good question. And it relates to what Ayshah was saying as well around digital first, really. Digital first becomes, it's never been more important now to be on all the platforms effectively. But my sort of counter argument would be that the production values within television are still the highest, I feel, in terms of what you see and what you get. So a TV produced piece or a TV produced analytical, whatever it is, I use Match of the Day as an example. Like, that isn't made for social, it's made for TV, and it's brilliantly done. Yes, absolutely, stuff like that has to go on social because you get the goals, you get everything instantaneously now, you get it immediately. So there's no way around that now. That's the way it happens. Is it comes out quickly, and people know about it before you've had a chance to sit down and put the schedule up and see what's on later. It doesn't necessarily work like that now. But having said that, there are still values to be had in making programming and journalism and news for an audience that does consume the TV still. That I don't think it should be forgotten about. Basically, what I'm saying is that I think that Wimbledon as an example, right? There's brilliant clips that have gone viral on social media. The champagne cork popping thing. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah.
That went mad. That went mad. Yeah, but that went out on TV first. That was TV first. That was shown on TV first before that. So someone would have seen that before they would have clocked it was also going viral. So there are it's not all about get out on Reels and TikTok before strong kind of production is done for TV. It can definitely works both ways, obviously, but I just do feel like it's that it depends on the show, I suppose, as well. It depends on the show, what you're doing. If you've got a live football game that people have paid, broadcasters have paid millions to show, and it's TV and then it's social, rather than social, then TV. I mean, it's which one comes first, really? Which one do you plug to begin with? I think sport's a different game, really, when it comes to news and current affairs. I think it's much more. You gather it. I don't. Maybe pubs are not necessarily as sort of social the places that you would go to now to go and watch a big game. But I think as a gathering, a big event like Women's Euros on at the moment, like those sorts of things. You go to maybe like a great sports bar. There's loads of people. You're in the atmosphere, don't you? So that's still, TV and all that. That still does have that draw and pull factor.
I think what Ayshah was saying too about analysis is absolutely spot on, because I think nowadays, the whole of the way that social media is working is you're kind of part of the comments and the chat and whatever. And the reason that I want to watch things like Match of the Day is actually not to watch the football, because I've already seen the results and I've probably seen the goals. I want to hear not Gary Lineker anymore, but what the pundits have to say, what Alan Shearer's going to say, what they think. Was that a penalty? You want to hear other people's opinions, whether it's sport or news. And I think that's why podcasts are doing so well, because I love that's entertainment. You just want to hear how other people are interpreting what's going on and be part of a conversation of the deeper dive. And I think that's definitely where it's going now. It's the kind of the opinions behind the news and behind the sport.
Okay, I have one last question here to end on, and it's a particularly tricky one, if you ask me.
Oh, good.
Yeah, here we go. The polarization of politics scares me. Does it scare you in a news setting? Who should we go for? Lizzy? Chuck that one your way.
Thanks. Discovery Education is obviously an American company, and there's been no greater polarization of politics than the recent American election campaign. And I think, that's been, and we also obviously had the UK election closely before. So that was quite interesting in terms of like the coverage side of it, and the difference of sort of what went on in the UK during that campaign. Obviously there's different rules and such, like, but just the polarization, you can see like the extremes basically. And and at what point do you where do you draw the line of coverage, especially when it's for children? And we just focused on the facts, not every single little argument or kind of, obviously there was loads of, it was just, with especially the American side of things, bombarded with like little tidbits of news stories, but we just ignored a lot of them and just focused on the real key issues that mattered and were going to be long-term critical and important and relevant to our audience, and just tried not to get bogged down in all the news.
I would say that it's not the polarization that is scary. I think polarization has always existed, back to Margaret Thatcher and the miners, Arthur Scargill. There's always been polarization. There always will be polarization. What is scary is the algorithm, because if you are reading one thing, one particular point of view, you're getting more and more of that echo chamber, which is why, back to what we do, what trusted news sources do, is that balance. And that's the thing. It's making sure that, say, polarization has always been there, but that I think it's getting more and more difficult for people to get a balanced perspective. And I think somehow that needs to be broken, so that people are seeing not just more and more of the same, but other views and other opinions on things.
I absolutely agree with you, Nikki. I think that the American media landscape is so very different, because obviously they've got like news entertainment in all their things, and what they are seeing on Fox to what they're seeing on CNN is very, very different and very polarized. We're, lucky in this country, we have the likes of BBC, ITN, ITV, 5, 4, that we are within strict Ofcom guidelines, and we can't broadcast in the way that they do in America. So I still think we have that, that key selling point. But what we're seeing online is scary, because you are more likely to just see the news that you agree with, and then you're going to go further kind of down that hill. And I think it's really important for news organizations like ourselves to remember that and still pump out information that's fair, that's balanced, that's impartial. Those are values that I hold really dear. And it's really important because when, at Channel 4 News, I get attacked from politicians on both sides. And I'm like, that's fantastic. That's great, because at least it means I'm doing my job right. And I never want to be in the position where I'm not being impartial and where I'm not coming up with facts and truths. That's not a position that I want to be in. And I think it's something that news organisations really need to take very seriously, because we don't want to get into the situation where people are just not trusting us and not listening to us anymore.
Gavin, any final thoughts on that one?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely, yeah. Jerry Springer style closing argument.
Finally.
Yeah, no, it's I completely agree with Ayshah, Nicky, and Lizzy. It's the way it is now. As broadcasters and as impartial communicators, we have to be straight with the facts, and not leaning in our viewpoints in terms of coverage or analysis. It's got to be balanced. It's got to be fair. It's got to be reasoned. And you can't deviate from that, quite simply, because otherwise, that's pretty much the end of public service broadcasting, isn't it? So I feel like we have a real strong duty to maintain and stick to those impartiality rules and regulations. Otherwise, I feel like we're just another gob in the ocean,
A gob in the ocean, and there we shall.
The title for the webinar.
Thank you all. Sadly, that's all we've got time for. I'd like to say the biggest thank you to Nicky, Gavin, Ayshah, and Lizzy for their time with us this evening. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and I'm hoping that the audience will have too. But you can find more information about all of our fabulous events available from the Royal Television Society at rts.org.uk/events, and we hope to see you soon.